Welcome to Recovered Space podcast, where we discuss science and real stories of eating disorder recovery. I'm Anastasia, and I'm the founder of Recovered Space, and I'm thrilled to be your host on this podcast with Dr. David Garner, leading expert in eating disorder recovery field with over 40 years of experience. Welcome, David. Glad to have you here.
I'm very excited to join this conversation. Just wanted to mention I have a Ph.D. in clinical psychology. I've been a university professor for years. I owned a clinic treating eating disorders, and now I practice as a life coach.
Perfect. Thank you for this introduction. And in today's episode, together with Dr. Garner, we will be discussing such an important topic as nutrition in eating disorder recovery. We will discover why it's so important and essential to have structured meal plan, how metabolism and nutrition are related, and we will discuss a few practical steps and tools to put together a meal plan that will work for you, and of course, so much more. And before we begin, we would like to emphasize that everything we are discussing in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. We are not providing any medical, psychiatric, or psychological advice. Please always seek advice of your physician or any other certified healthcare provider. And that we said, Dr. Garner, let's start. And just to begin, can you please tell us why nutrition is such a big deal in eating disorder recovery?
Nutrition is very important because I think you could probably characterize eating disorders better as dieting disorders. All eating disorders, or virtually all eating disorders, begin with people restricting their food intake and actually losing weight. In this sense, this links eating disorders together. And this is important too because it really represents one of the causal factors for eating problems, or one of the maintaining factors for eating disorders, has to do with weight suppression, inadequate nutrition over a period of time, which then causes people to really develop a variety of symptoms which are pretty serious as a result of being starved.
We hear a lot about metabolism and how it impacts our overall health and well-being. And I wonder how metabolism and nutrition are related, and probably how metabolism can be a bit messed up for someone who is suffering from eating disorder.
Well, metabolism is the process by which food or nutrition is broken down into energy in the cells. And so nutrition is the food we eat. And of course, metabolism is the way that food is converted to energy. And it's very important because metabolism in generally is quite adaptive, in the sense that if you go through a period of undernutrition, your metabolism slows down. If you go through a period of overnutrition, it speeds up to try and create this balance or homeostasis. Unfortunately, with an eating disorder, people override this natural process. They begin to suppress their weight, and their metabolism slows dramatically. And it's important to realize why this occurs. Through the hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, metabolism has actually aided in the survival of people during famines. During a famine, your weight goes down, your metabolism slows to keep you alive. If your body doesn't react this way and does not slow to try and keep you, alive during the process of this undergoing a semi-starvation, what happens is you just die. So natural selection has really enabled people who are very responsive to undernutrition to survive. With eating disorders, the problem is that when people are undernourished, yes, they do survive for the most part, but their metabolism slows dramatically, their caloric needs decline dramatically, and their health suffers because of the poor nutrition.
Right, that makes total sense. And I experienced this myself, the consequences of metabolism being slowed down. But as we're going to discuss moving forward, that there are some ways to get back your metabolism, and not probably to the normal degree, but even to enhance it. And continuing this conversation about nutrition, can you please tell us why it's so essential to include all macro and micronutrients in your meal plan?
Well, it's important to know that most people that have eating disorders, just like many people who don't have eating disorders, have a misconception about macronutrients. There are three macronutrients. There's carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And these are very important. All of these are very important in human metabolism. And all of them are simply energy. Carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. protein has 4 calories per gram, and fat has 9 calories per gram. There is this idea that somehow one of those macronutrients is actually deleterious or harmful, but it turns out they're not harmful at all. And also, so people try and limit carbohydrates, they try and limit fats, sometimes limit proteins as part of a diet. And this is a big mistake because, again, all of these macronutrients are simply energy. And as long as you keep the calorie level the same, it doesn't matter which one of these nutrients, macronutrients you consume. It's important to have all of them and to not shy away from any of them.
What is the reason why we do have such strong misconceptions and kind of myth about all these macronutrients, right? Because some people may think that all carbs are bad, so including not only high processed like high sugary food, but like all kind of carbs, which is complete nonsense. You need to have carbs to function properly. Some people may think that you should avoid fat by all means, otherwise it will cause you weight gain. Do you have any opinion why we do have this heavy misconceptions about nutrition and about macronutrients, and why they're so strong for people with eating disorders?
Well, the reason why we have these misconceptions is largely because of the diet industry. It's important to understand that some diets are low fat diets, some are high fat diets. Unfortunately, there are new diets every single day that appear on the internet and appear in books. And and many of these are advocating limiting one of the macronutrients. Unfortunately, they're all just ridiculous. The reason they're ridiculous is if any of them really worked, why would we need another one? Why would we need another one next year? So clearly, all of these diets, the banana diet, the low carb diet, the paleo diet, all of these work in the short run. But very quickly, your body adapts to the undernutrition that occurs with some weight loss, and people typically gain the weight back. And then, of course, there are new customers for the next diet. So it's important to understand that the macronutrients and are all should be your friends, and that restricting any of them is a serious mistake and leads to weight loss, which then leads to weight rebound. The
Right.
dieting industry is a $50 billion a year industry in the United States, at least. And this is why you see new diets appearing every day. It's about money. Remember that people with eating disorders are desperate for information to help them lose weight. So that's why they're so vulnerable to different fad diets. Um, it, you know,
Right.
People that are not so desperate to lose weight, they don't pay much attention to the diet industry. Even though they're bombarded with it, they don't pay as much attention. But people that are desperate to lose weight, they're much more vulnerable.
Yeah, that's right. And with that in mind, can you please tell us why meal planning is so important? And what I mean by that, can you please share with us what goals, functions, and probably even purpose meal planning has in eating disorder recovery?
Well, it's important to understand that one of the cardinal features of people with eating disorders is extraordinary anxiety around eating. So they're really not certain whether they're eating too much or sometimes whether they're eating too little. But mostly there's a lot of anxiety around eating, a lot of uncertainty, and worry about food intake. So one of the real aims of meal planning is to try and provide people with a clear program of eating, which they can rely upon as being this is what they should be doing. It alleviates anxiety because they know, okay, my plan is to eat a certain amount of food at a certain time during the day. So it takes the indecision and really replaces it with some clarity and some certainty. So meal planning is a tool to help people regulate their food intake when they're very nervous and anxious about how to consume food. And there are several types. There are several types of meal plans as well. Um, First of all, there's kind of the absence of a meal plan, which is mindful eating, which really tells the participant to try and focus upon their inner feelings around food intake, whether they're hungry or whether they are eating out of anxiety or whether they are satiated. The problem with this is that when people are undernourished, it completely disrupts their hunger and satiety signals. So you're asking somebody to pay attention to signals which are disrupted. So it's a lot like asking an alcoholic to pay close attention to the road if they're inebriated. Well, that's really their judgment is altered by the alcohol. And the same is true when people are undernourished. Their judgment around food intake is greatly altered. So, meal planning is a solution. There are two basic types of meal plans. One is, I guess I'd call it kind of a flexible approach, where you're trying to have people eat a specific amount of food at, and space their meals over time and particular types of food. But it's basically you follow this meal plan by writing down at the different times of day that you're supposed to eat the foods that you're eating and have it look like a non diet.
Mm-hmm. Right.
This is useful for many people, and it can be adjusted based upon somebody observing the meal plan and saying, hey, this is okay, or it's a problem, based upon the amount of food that people are consuming or when they're consuming it. The other type of meal plan is much more rigid, which involves prescribing a precise number of calories to someone and having those calories be divided up amongst at least 3 to 5 times of eating during the day. So everybody would have breakfast, have a certain number of calories for breakfast, maybe have a snack, have lunch, certain specified number of calories, dinner, and maybe another snack, each time with the calorie level being controlled. The reason why this is useful for people that are perhaps very underweight or extremely nervous about food consumption because it's so precise that it enables them to know, look, I'm following the plan exactly. And I'm not having 1 calorie more or 1 calorie less. I'm really sticking to my meal plan. So this, if people buy into this approach, this can be helpful in alleviating anxiety.
And I believe my next question goes, you touched on this already a little bit, but probably you can give us a bit more details. How the approach of meal planning can differ for people who are suffering from anorexia nervosa, from bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. Because to my understanding, people can have different goals in their recovery. For some of them, it can be restore their weight. For some of them, for people who are underweight, right? For people who are in normal weight or probably a bit bigger weight, they probably like no goals related to their weight because they're already in normal weight. And I wonder how someone should think about adjustment to meal plan related to their condition that they're suffering from.
Right. I don't think that I don't think the nature or the diagnosis that you receive really is the pivotal feature that distinguishes different types of meal plans for the different subgroups. There's much more heterogeneity within each of the diagnostic subgroups than there is between them. So it's
Mhm.
important to understand that if you're feeling extraordinarily anxious about eating, and perhaps the more precise strategy would alleviate some of your anxiety.
Mhm.
If you're not quite as if you kind of get the idea that I shouldn't be dieting, and a meal plan is an operational definition of non-dieting. It's a way of really clarifying what it means to not diet, and then making it a matter of record so that you can somebody can look at it and say, yes, this is not a diet. So if people are extremely underweight, then sometimes the more rigid approach is better because there's a tendency with a loose approach, to perhaps gravitate toward undereating. And for somebody that's very underweight, that can be dangerous because perhaps they're right on the edge of being in serious being medically compromised.
Mhm.
And if that's the case, then you can't afford to lose another 2 pounds or kilos. You can't do that. So therefore, really being very careful at prescribing the exact number of calories in these kinds of critical circumstances may be important. But I think as long as you are keeping in mind that what is a meal plan, it's really the operational definition of not dieting. Because people are confused about what is a diet and what isn't a diet. And this is a
Exactly.
way of making it very clear about what it is that you need to follow and making it more acceptable to somebody who's very nervous.
Right. And Dr. Garner, let's talk a little bit about fear foods, right? Because we're talking about meal planning, we're talking about getting back your nutrients, right? And probably just try to start feeling a bit less concerned about food. From my own experience, right? When I started my own recovery and over the course of that time when I was suffering from eating disorders, of a few kinds of them, I had kind of bunch of fear foods. And what I mean by that, the kind of food that made me binge on them or made me feel even more anxious than all other food. And I wonder, is there any approach for people to follow how they can reintroduce this fear food in their meal plan so they kind of moving forward to their recovery goals, which is
Yeah,
the main ultimate goal, is to get to the point where you live life free from eating disorder. And as we discussed in previous episode, life without eating disorder is the life when someone doesn't experience symptoms of eating disorder, so feeling all right around food, right? So can you please share with
well,
us how someone can approach that?
sure. Well, I think it's important that when people have eating disorders, they typically, over time, begin to divide food into good foods and bad foods.
Right.
And usually these good foods are foods that have a connotation of dieting or dietary being a dietary food that is helpful in losing weight. So increasingly, as people move along in their eating disorder, these bad foods become terrifying. And people feel if they consume these bad foods, they really have blown their diet. They've really committed some kind of horrible act of nutritional malfeasance. So one of the things that I think is important to remember that when you're starting to recover, you need to be able to begin to take some of these foods that are terrifying and reintroduce them to try and reduce anxiety. Remember, one of the most important treatments for almost all forms of anxiety is exposure. So it's important to expose yourself to both a quantity of food, which is more reasonable, and also a type of food that's more reasonable, as well expose yourself to eating throughout the day, which sometimes people try and restrict their food intake to just at night, for example, or
Right.
never eat past a particular point in the day. So reintroducing feared foods is very important, particularly for people who have binge eating problems, because people with binge eating problems, they divide their own behavior into good and bad behavior. So as long as they're virtuous and good and consuming just dietary foods, then they feel that they're doing a good job.
Mhm.
But if they have one slip, consume one donut, they believe they've blown it, it's a disaster, and since they've blown it, they might as well just eat everything in sight. Well, that's obviously very destructive. So one of the ways of overcoming this good and bad food distinction is to introduce some of these quote bad foods into their
Mhm.
diet, but do it in a very specific and prescribed amount. So you shouldn't consume enormous amounts, but consume some. So rather than a box of cookies, maybe you have two cookies every day. But that means that cookies begin to gradually fall into the acceptable category, and the fear and anxiety and worry associated with consuming them begins to decline.
Yeah,
So,
this is
what were your feared foods?
that's a great question. So my fear food was kind of milky, creamy waffles. And I remember that anytime I was doing grocery or I was just so hungry, I just, having them in my head, I was like, oh, geez, it would have been so nice to have like, just a bite, just one. But it never was one, ever. It was always the whole pack. And then following with the huge guilt, huge self-blame, this feeling like, why am I doing this? And especially because before this decision, which is not really a decision that I'm gonna binge, you kind of promise yourself, today I'm not gonna to binge. Today is my binge free day. But again, as long as you are under eating, to me, anyways, it was in my case, anytime I was under eating, and especially if I was under eating for a few days before, this episode of being just got me randomly, and I was like, why is going on? Like, I promised myself that I'm not gonna do that, but I failed to realize, and I failed to understand that this is not about my will or my motivation. It was about my body being undernourished and just my hunger. And because I was so hungry, I didn't have that much capacity and power to choose kind of not bingy food, because that food were so heavily restricted. So anytime I was like feeling super hungry, I just get back to these fear foods. But then, as you said, that approach to put this back to my diet, to my meal plan incrementally, day by day, it just made me feel so much at ease and so relieved, because I knew that every day I'll have my piece of this creamy waffle. It's not something forbidden. I don't need to go and buy it and then hide probably from someone. so no one can see what I'm doing. It was becoming part of my diet, but in a good way diet, my new meal plan approach. And day by day, I would even say month by month, and I would even say year by year, I kept introducing different types of food that were so scary to me for like 10 years back. And now I can just reassure people that there is life where you don't have any fear foods. Food is just food for you, and you can enjoy it, have fun about that, and you wouldn't be that much preoccupied of potential effect on your body and shape.
Most people with binge eating disorder really believe the solution to their problem is increasing their self-control. And rather than understanding that one needs to correct their nutritional imbalance, their undernutrition, slowly, and then be able to, rather than exercising greater self-control, they actually need to engage in self-control, but have it more limited, kind of a balanced approach, as opposed to an all or nothing approach. That's a critical feature of the recovery process for bulimia.
Yeah, I can heavily relate because I've been suffering from bulimia as well. And one of the main focuses of my recovery after I kind of got on the normal track with my nutrition, with my meal planning, with my food in general, is was it was working on removing this severe all or nothing thinking pattern, like cognitive just bug, just cognitive mistake, because that applied to actually every sphere in my life. I was like, if I did something wrong in my job, I used to blame myself and think kind of bad about myself. But I'm grateful to my recovery because it healed not only my relationship with food and body, but also it just healed my partly who I am. So I'm not that rigid about myself anymore. I'm not that, self-controlled anymore in a good way. So it gave me more space just to live and feel good about myself, even if something goes a little bit wrong.
Really important, a kind of a common feature of people that develop eating disorders is perfectionism. And unfortunately, being perfectionistic ends up being the undercurrent, and the perfectionism is that people feel that they're not doing things that are acceptably when they're not doing things perfectly. There's no flexibility. And one of the serious problems with this is that people spend a lot of time being critical of themselves because they aren't perfect. No, we're human. We're not perfect. And you need to be tolerant and compassionate related to your foibles and fallibilities, rather than, in other words, you can be very good. I wouldn't discourage people from being very good, but being perfect is actually impossible. And if you set that up as the criterion for evaluating your self-worth, you're going to be really pretty disappointed most of the time. But perfectionism, unfortunately, oftentimes degrades your performance because you're so anxious and so worried that you end up not performing as well as you would if you just had high standards.
Can you please talk about the the main guidelines and the main tips and probably rules that someone should have in mind when they're thinking about putting their meal plan together? Because of course we do recommend that you ask for help from professional dietitian or professional nutritionist to have your meal plan being tailored to your specific needs and your recovery goals. But I can assume, and I know it for sure, that some people just cannot afford it, or they're not able to get this type of support. And I wonder if it's even possible that people can put together their meal plan, again, recovery meal plan for themselves. And once they start in doing so, what are the main guidelines and main rules that they should follow in order to succeed?
Well, sometimes people need additional professional help, either from a therapist or from a dietitian or a coach. But that's oftentimes helpful. But there are a subset of people who actually, one of the reasons they have struggled with recovery is because they don't have access to adequate information. So they want to recover, they want to try and figure out what are the steps that I need to take, but it's very confusing because of all of the misinformation that's out on the internet, and sometimes books that are just not very helpful. So it's important to be able to have high quality information, and then so you know what to do. And then I think many people can actually begin the process of recovery by paying attention to a meal plan. So I think that self-help, or a very good uh, series of podcasts, series of kind of pieces of information can help people put together a meal plan. And the meal plan has several ingredients. The first
Mm-hmm.
ingredient is that you need to, and we'll actually show people perhaps two examples of meal plans at some point.
Right.
But one of the things to really keep in mind is that you need to spread your calories out throughout the day. Many people with eating disorders don't have breakfast, they may not have lunch, and they may cram all of their calories into a few hours late in the day. Well, this
Mm-hmm.
does not help their metabolic rate at all, and also it increases their feelings of discomfort because they're starving for most of the day, and then they're hitting themselves with a giant load of calories at the end of the day, which can really make them feel uncomfortable. So it's important to have calories spread out throughout the day. It's important to have an adequate number of calories that, as I said earlier, look like non-dieting, and
Mm-hmm.
then to be able to have a certain types of food that don't have dietetic or dietary connotations. So these would be foods that would be that you would have perhaps had before you had the eating disorder. And trying to implement this in a very gradual way. But I think that those principles are very important in terms of constructing a meal plan.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing all of them. I believe that will be helpful for so many people. And actually, you just, made me think about the next question, which is about extreme hunger. Because when you were talking about that people need to take some time in order to understand how much calorie they need in order to feel good, don't feel that they are hungry all the time. I want to discuss us a little bit this topic of extreme hunger that people are discussing everywhere online and offline. And I believe the biggest question about this topic is, first of all, what is it? Like from probably scientific standpoint, and second of all, how should people go about that? Because I remember personally in my story, it was probably my first 3 months. After 3 months, that disappeared. I was following my meal plan, so I didn't feel that I'm hungry all the time. So I was okay. Not, I mean, relatively okay. But anyways, I do remember that a few times I just had these sensations of hunger, even though I ate enough, even though I wasn't in a restrictive state and my food was my medicine, right? But anyways, I felt this extreme hunger from time to time. And I see that people are talking a lot about that. So I wonder if you can explain to us what to do about that even.
Well, first of all, remember that hunger is kind of adaptive because if you weren't hungry, you wouldn't eat enough and you probably would just no longer contribute to the gene pool because you wouldn't be around. So hunger is adaptive in that sense. But also, I think people that are in recovery or in the process of recovery usually don't understand how long it takes to overcome the ravages of undernutrition.
Right.
There's a famous experiment that was done on volunteers that were put through an experimental diet where they lost about 25% of their body weight over 6 months. So it was pretty rapid. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like years of an eating disorder being undernourished. It was just 6 months. But when they these men, refed them over time, over the next 14 months, that many of them began binge eating, which is pretty interesting. They began binge eating even though they were getting more than adequate nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
They would overconsume. And even once they got to a normal weight, they'd overconsume. And in fact, many of them overshot their previous weight due to binge eating problems.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm assuming the binge eating related to some kind of hunger. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
either something physiologically was operating with these people. And it's true for people that during the process of recovery. It takes it takes as much as a year or more for the erroneous or problematical signals of hunger to cease over time. So people will be recovering, eating an adequate number of calories, and may even be at kind of a better weight, but they still have these episodes or periods where they feel they're ravenous and feel that
Mm-hmm.
they want to eat everything in sight, or just experience extreme hunger. Again, it's a natural process. Remember, throughout most of human evolution, overeating wasn't a problem. Undereating killed people off.
Right.
Overeating didn't really kill people off at all. So there was selective kind of natural selection in favor of people who would not, who would live because of in the presence of undernutrition, and also they weren't selected out of the population for overnutrition. So
Mm-hmm.
that again, it's important to understand that a lot of this relates to biology.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that people don't overeat or get hungry because of emotional reasons, but people, these are triggers of overeating. It's triggers of overconsumption as opposed to the underlying cause of overeating in response to hunger. So again, hunger signals get really mixed up if you've been through a long period of either undernutrition or dietary restraint. Even if you have not lost weight, if you simply don't eat throughout most of the day and then consume all of your calories toward the end of the day, then remember most of the day you spent hungry,
Right.
and then you may overconsume later on, but you go from feeling extremely hungry to feeling bloated and full. And sometimes people even consume after they feel full,
Mm-hmm.
because this is what happens with people that are exposed to chronic undernutrition.
Right. And am I right, Dr. Gardner? And please correct me if I'm wrong, that if someone during their recovery process, so they started, they're following meal plan, so they're getting there. But anyways, if they do experience the episodes of extreme hunger, that probably for them it's better to follow and just to eat something so they don't feel hungry. Somehow react on this extreme hunger, just have some nice banana or something.
Well, so one of the things that can be very helpful is that, particularly even if people are following a meal plan, you're right, they may have an episode where they feel a period where they feel really hungry.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think I would oftentimes recommend that they would have, okay, you have one kind of bit of food. You have a granola bar, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and keep that on the sidelines, and that's outside of your meal plan. So
Mm-hmm.
please keep this food as safety food. And if you're feeling hungry, if you have a very clearly circumscribed amount of food that's available to you, it's quite different than saying, okay, I'm really hungry, I'll just eat everything in sight. So
Mm-hmm.
you have this food which inoculates you against the binge eating or over consuming. So yes, particularly during recovery, there are periods of time where you have a very strong hunger signal. Well, rather than just saying, okay, I'll just eat everything because I'm hungry, or I'll eat nothing and just exercise complete self control, maybe you can have a stopgap strategy to introduce a certain number of calories where there's a start and stop. That's why I like granola bars, or
Yeah.
bananas are good. But granola
Yeah.
bars are particularly good because you have to open the package and you can consume, open it. Well, I mean, hopefully open the package and not
Mhm.
eat the package too, but
Yeah.
open the package, open the package, consume it, and then there's an end to it. And that's very important. It's to try and have this clear amount of prescribed uh, emergency food in the presence that you consume in the presence of extreme hunger.
Great. Thank you for explaining this all for me as well and for everyone who is listening to us right now, because it's been so yeah, much confusion around the topic. I mean, online, as far as I know, because I've been doing my research before this episode, and it was like a bit shocked even because people are so desperate, to find the answer, what the best way to go about that. And now I believe that they will get the answer. So just guys, buy granola bars. They're always nice and sweet.
And try and keep us informed about whether this is helpful to you.
Yeah.
That's important too. Just we really want to make sure that people join in the conversation that we're having and send responses to us based upon how effective they think some of the strategies we're suggesting are in helping them with their recovery process.
Yeah, sure. So please drop them everywhere you can in YouTube comment section and Spotify, or you can email us. We're gonna have our email in the show note caption. So please leave it all, and we promise that we will do our best to address them all in our upcoming episodes. So you do get real value out of our conversation, because we can, keep talking and talking for hours, but the ultimate goal is to make sure that you you're getting better and we are helping you somehow and we are here to help you. So of course, like, send it all to us.
And please, there oftentimes will touch upon a topic that people want to hear more about that topic,
Right.
because obviously we aren't certain about exactly the dosage of that particular topic that's relevant for everyone. So if you want to hear more about something, please let us know.
Yeah, surely. And with that said, I do want to hear more from you, David Garner, about potential challenges that someone can face in terms of their meal planning. Meal planning is a thing, and during this time when they're following meal planning, like based from your experience working with your clients, with your patient back then in treatment center, can you please share with us some common challenges that people may face, maybe not, hopefully not, during this meal planning phase?
So the biggest challenge is getting to the point where you actually say, listen, dieting hasn't worked particularly well, so I need to do something about that. That's the biggest challenge, is getting started. Another challenge is to try and avoid self-deception. I think so either self-deception or deciding that you're going to meal plan some days, but not meal plan another day.
Mm-hmm.
So really, meal planning is designed to be like guardrails to keep you on track.
Right.
And so if you take down the guardrails, of course, you can fall over the cliff. So it's important once you institute this to keep it in place until you feel that your eating behavior is normalized quite a lot. And meal planning is not the way that I would advise people to eat ultimately after recovery. We
Mm-hmm.
can talk about that maybe in a subsequent podcast, which is what would I advise people to do in terms of eating behavior once they've totally recovered?
Mm-hmm.
Because the recovery process may have certain elements to it that are optimal for recovery, but maybe not optimal down the road for ultimate health.
Right.
But certainly, for example, I would advise everybody who is recovering to introduce feared foods. But once
Mm-hmm.
you no longer have feared foods, then how do you go about eating? You don't need to introduce them even after
Right.
5 years after recovery. That may not be necessary. You might be introducing them spontaneously. But what's the best way to go about eating for health once you've totally recovered?
Yeah, this is a great, actually, ultimate goal for people who are listening to us right now to go through this entire process, even if it takes longer. So then we can have this podcast and discuss, okay, now you've done this all beautiful journey, and we're here to talk probably how you want to your nutrition look like after you recover. I believe it's such an inspiring goal for people. I have so many questions still about my nutrition, but for health. And this is so different. Your nutrition in order to recover from eating disorder,
Yeah.
and then your nutrition for health. So, and I believe that ultimately everyone will get there.
Well, you're right. It's very important to try and distinguish between those. And it's one of the real advantages about the focus, I think, of coaching versus therapy. Therapy
Mm-hmm.
is excellent, necessary for many people. But therapy is to try and help you get over being sick, whereas coaching is trying to help you optimize your experiences once you're well. So
Right.
hopefully don't get abandoned just because you're not sick anymore. What are the kinds of recommendations for people who are really well, but actually want to try and optimize their health and optimize their life experiences?
I do want to make a little step back in our conversation because I kind of forgot and asked one of the most burning questions to me. And this question is about potential weight fluctuation during recovery process. I assume that for many people, this concern goes together with the potential fear of weight gain. And if you can help us to understand the science behind weight gain during the recovery process, give us this rationale how this weight change and weight fluctuation happens for someone in recovery, that can potentially reduce someone's fear of weight gain. Because again, I just see everywhere, offline and online, the people who are suffering, who are challenged, that they do want to recover, but this very strong fear of weight gain just stops them, just doesn't allow
Okay.
them to move forward. And I wonder what you can tell us about that. So probably it will help people, to do little stuff.
Well, it's a really, really good point. Remember, people who have eating problems end up being terrified of weight gain, and much of their life revolves about producing weight loss. So part of that involves oftentimes becoming addicted to the scale. So
Right.
people will look at the scale every day, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. And one of the problems with that is that the numbers on the scale do not provide you with information about changes in body mass. They
Mm-hmm.
provide you with information about changes in body mass plus water. And there's tremendous natural fluctuation in water balance every day. So if you're preoccupied with the scale, you're preoccupied with numbers that in many ways are fluctuating because of just normal fluctuations in water balance. And the solution to that is not to not have water, or to, and we can maybe talk about hydration issues, but it's really to understand that there is daily fluctuations in weight due to something other than body mass, due to water. So if people who are addicted to weighing themselves daily, I would advise trying to back away from that. And either the best idea ultimately is not weigh yourself at all because your body kind of knows where it should be and it
Hmm.
stays there usually. If you overconsume a bit, it usually your metabolic rate speeds up and it brings you back down to normal. And if you undereat, it slows down and brings you back to normal as well. But the fluctuations in water can be so misleading and cause people to panic because one day their weight has gone up 2 pounds while they think, I've done something wrong, something terrible. And they get very anxious and upset and distressed. But it's really just due to a fluctuation in water balance. So it's important during the process of recovery to understand the natural variations in body weight.
Hmm.
And the only way that you can really judge changes in body weight accurately is over a lengthy period of time. You realize that, from the thousands and thousands of years of human evolution, people didn't have scales
Hmm.
and their weight was okay.
Yeah.
So scales, I mean, scales are good for medical purposes to make sure that people haven't lost weight due to some other problem that has not been identified yet. But weighing yourself often is very misleading. You're right. Water balance due to your menstrual cycle, due to other factors, really is important. And unfortunately, when people recognize that water balance may be important, sometimes they limit their fluid intake. This can be very dangerous in terms of their sodium levels becoming really low, and they can have serious problems related to underhydration. Or overhydration can be also very serious.
Hmm.
People can develop medical difficulties, serious medical difficulties, and sometimes death due to uh, you know too much water.
Hmm.
Sometimes people, particularly when they're in treatment, they realize that their therapist or their treatment center wants them to gain a certain amount of weight, and they're not doing so. So they may actually consume inordinate amounts of water to make weight during treatment. Well, that's very dangerous. That can lead to seizures and lead to serious problems, including death, by overconsuming water. So that can drive your sodium levels low, and you can have real problems. So, so I guess the point is understand weight fluctuates naturally on a day-to-day basis, and it's best to limit the number of times you weigh yourself so that you look at trends rather than looking at your weights daily. And the other problem that can develop with weighing yourself too often is that sometimes actually seeing your weight on the scale, regardless of what it is, can become a secondary reinforcer. It can
Hmm.
be very potent. Some people say, listen, I wake up in the morning and I only feel okay when I look at the scale. Well, that's a pretty sad situation when your mood is regulated by the numbers on a scale.
Right.
And if they go down, people are feeling good. If they go up, they say, well, I guess I better do something about that. But they're paying attention to random numbers or numbers which provide not very very clear or precise data about actual changes in body weight or body mass.
I totally agree. And probably I mentioned in 1 year after I started my recovery, I just woke up one day and I decided that I just gonna throw my scales away because I realized how my mood heavily depends on the numbers. And even though I was weighing myself probably once a week, probably bi-weekly, but even though once I started feeling better about myself, better about my life, better about my body, better about my relationship with food, I just realized what function this skill serve for me? What's the purpose? It just can make me feel anxious, make me feel sad, make me feel can trigger me. I've done such a long way already, right? So I've been through this journey for quite a long time. I don't
Mhm.
want to jeopardize it. I just don't want to yeah, I just want to remove all possible triggers just to put myself at ease. And once I've done it, it was kind of very nice feeling like yeah, this is all right. And there is life out there without scales. So
It's absolutely right. But again, some people are so terrified about weight change that they feel that without a scale, they just couldn't function. You're right.
Right.
I think toward the end of when you're well into recovery, I think it's best to dispense with scales if you can, because they really aren't necessary. Your weight's going to fluctuate within a normal range, and it's going to do that whether you use a scale or not.
Yeah. Thank you for such a great words of encouragement. And Dr. Gardner, my last question is always, is there anything I didn't ask you, but you would like to share with us around this topic?
I think that one of the things that's important for people to remember is to remain optimistic about recovery.
Right.
I think that oftentimes people they read. Some people say you can never recover from an eating disorder. Well, that's just patently absurd. It's not correct. Many people completely recover, and I actually believe on the tail end of recovery, people can actually be healthier than they were before the eating disorder began, because they develop a lot of tools for self-understanding, a lot of tolerance, strategies for dealing with perfectionism and anxiety, which maybe they didn't have before the eating disorder began.
Right.
So I think you can be very optimistic about recovery. I think most people do very well with treatment or with self help. People do well, and I think that should be the goal: is to understand that recovery is possible, and to feel that you can devote all of your efforts to trying to develop the strategies and tools to be able to help you on the way to recovery.
Yeah. Thank you for this kind words. They're very helpful. Yeah, I'm kind of live example that recovery is possible. Just try to be as self-compassionate as you can be, and even try to develop self-compassion, because you'll need it during the whole journey of recovery. And but there is very nice life out there without eating disorder, and we are here to help you go and reach this life. And
Well,
with
it's important, I think, to add on to that point that although some people can develop chronic eating disorders that just don't go away, I mean that's possible. But studies that have been done of people that have modestly severe eating disorders or binge eating problems, they followed these people in college and then followed them later on, 10, 12 years later, and
Mhm.
most of them are completely okay. So recovery is something, and some of these people have treatment, maybe some did not, but sometimes recovery is kind of the natural outcome for
Mhm.
most people. With help, it can go faster, and sometimes you can take people who would go into be in a chronic state of undernutrition and can reverse that and help them recover. But it's important to remember recovery is the most likely outcome. So,
Right.
stay inspired and stay
Oh,
optimistic.
yeah. Thank you, Dr. Gardner, for such a profound and interesting conversation today. Can't tell how grateful I am. And I believe people who are listening to us, they will also be grateful for you sharing all of this with us. And as we already said, please feel free to leave all your comments and questions in the comment section on YouTube, or you can simply email us. Thank you so much, and take care. Until the next time.
You're very welcome.